Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jus Commune podcast. My name is Emilia Matais from the International University of Catalonia, and I am here very pleased to present a very special episode. We're going to talk about juridical papyrology. Here we are with three great specialists on the topic, Professor José Luis Alonso from the University of Zurich, Professor José Rodríguez Martín from the University of Vienna, and Professor Jakub Urbanik from the University of Warsaw. Welcome, everyone. So I would like to start with a very basic question. What is juridical papyrology, and why is it important for understanding the ancient legal systems?
Do you want any of us to particularly to answer?
You can start, Jose, since you raised the word.
And maybe Kuba should, because he edits a review that has this name in different decades, the journal Juristic Papyrology. As in its day, Raphael Taubenschlag decided to call this juristic and not legal, not anything else. I would say, in general, papyrology as such doesn't have a specific consistency, because what a papyrologist does in general is to deal with whatever the papyri offer. And the papyri offer a lot. And they also offer a lot regarding the law. And so what does juristic papyrology do? It deals with the papyri that give legal information of some sort. If I had to summarize what kind of legal information we find, this would take hours, but basically I would say we have legal sources, including legislation, as one would expect. Unfortunately, not so much as we would like. We have a lot regarding administration, both under the Ptolemies and in Roman Egypt, including what we call the administration of justice, so trial records, petitions. And then what we have above all, and I think this is what would take most from today's podcast, has to do with the private legal practice, with documents of private people, completely normal people, not just the elite, doing all the sorts of things that require the use of the law, getting married, getting divorced, concluding contracts of sale, of lease, everything that one can imagine. This is quantitatively the most important, I would say, the legal practice part, but also qualitatively, because if we didn't have the papyri, we wouldn't have the legal practice practically at all. You have to take into account papyrology defines itself in a rather artificial way. And for instance, the tablets, the wax tablets that we have in Western Europe mostly, they are also considered part of papyrology, just because they are not inscriptions. And so papyrology takes care of legal practice, you could say.
How does juridical papyrology emerge as a distinct field of study?
I would like to add to what my colleague Jose Luis just said. Maybe for the audience who are not really used to work or talk about these kind of things, we have to keep in mind that papyrus is a plant, and thus it is very difficult to conserve that these documents that are written in a plant, that they survive in Europe, which is really humid. So we had the wax tablets, like Jose Luis said, and another supports for writing, but we must imagine a world in which papyrus is the basic way of writing in paper in a world in which there is no paper. But in the wet Europe, we lost all those documents, and the only place in which they are kept, not the only one, but the main one in which these plants survived, it was in some dry place like in the desert or in Egypt. So in Egypt, papyrology is an incredible laboratory for this legal practice that Jose Luis was talking about. But we lost the reality of the perspective of the whole Roman world, apart from some little documents like wooden tablets or things like that, or indirect comments from the jurists or whatever. That's why papyrology is giving us an opportunity that in the whole Roman world is lost. And that's why the papyri of Egypt and the other documents that we have are so precious.
Thank you very much. And then I think, Jose Luis, you want to add something?
Yeah, just because I think we will center ourselves a lot, rightly, in what happens in Roman times, as the period in which Rome controls the entire Mediterranean. Maybe it's also good to add, at least now, because I fear we will lose sight of this very soon, that we have papyri also from the pharaonic time. And so also the Egyptian legal tradition itself the ancient Egyptian legal tradition of the time of the pharaohs, is also illuminated a little bit less because we have much less material by the papyri. And then before Rome conquers Egypt, of course, the great Hellenistic legal culture. So there is a lot in the papyri that doesn't have to do with the Roman Empire. But as soon as the Roman Empire conquers all the territories where papyri can be preserved, which is basically, as Chomi has explained, the Eastern Mediterranean, mostly Egypt, but also the Near East, as one can say, generically, Palestine, up to Kurdistan. These are very interesting papyri pergaments that Chomi has worked on. There we have a lot of other legal traditions. We have the Greek legal tradition, we have the Jewish legal tradition, very importantly, the Roman legal tradition, the Coptic legal tradition, and probably we would come back.
Yeah, and I think as the techniques are developing and you're able to see more how these things were patched and carbonized and all that, I think you will get to see more material. So this is really exciting times actually. But I would like to go to the origin of this. How this started. Like I know that the archaeological excavations in Egypt played a part when they discovered these dams in Oxyrhynchus, for example. What can you say about this sort of excavations and the role they played in this discovery of the discipline?
I think also talking about the audience who maybe are not specialists, we have also to imagine how archaeology used to work before there was this interest in the papyri. Not only archaeology as we conceive that in modern times, also scientific archaeology, but the seek for treasures, the seek for big pieces, the seek for things that were impressive or maybe easier to sell or to show. That means that in these first times, everything, these little dirty pieces of papyri were not so interesting as the big pieces that people were looking for that. Afterwards, and after Napoleon, and I think after in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, when also the blooming of all ancient history studies in a scientific way, when changing the perspective, people become to really realize how important, how a piece of information could we get from those papyri, even though before the Carta Borgiana or other papyri were more or less edited for the first time. It was in this Napoleon time and afterwards with this Egyptomany and also the interest for a scientific approach to these discoveries also put the focus in these pieces that before were not so important, like this old written text that suddenly became the most important, one of the most important sources in archaeology. But
the funny thing, this is a well-known story, and it's a kind of a funny one, a double funny story that has to do a lot with the Americans, I have to say. One of these stories that lead to the beginning of papyrology has to do with the American Civil War and the fact that during the American Civil War, the provision of cotton from the states in the south was interrupted. And so this was the great occasion for Egypt. We know, all of us, at least my grandmother, my mother, and all our mothers know that the best quality of cotton is the Egyptian cotton, right? And so this was the great chance for the Egyptian cotton. And in order to cultivate, you need fertilizer. And in Egypt, the best fertilizer since antiquity is the mud from the Nile, the mud with which the bricks of the ancient cities were made. And this was well known in the 19th century. So in the 60s of the 19th century, when the American Civil War exploded, you have these people called Sevakim that are looking for these ancient bricks. And they know that there are mounds called Kiman, where these bricks, these are the rests of ancient cities, where these bricks are in enormous quantities. And there was a specific campaign to find Sebak in 77 and 78, if I am right, of the 19th century, in which the Kiman that was being dismounted because they took away these mounds was Kiman Faris, and Kiman Faris was the old capital of the Arsinoid node, and thousands of papyri were found there, and these were all found. This is a story that is important for Chomin for many reasons. Most of the papyri that were found there were bought by an Austrian, actually an antiquities dealer, but he was also selling carpets, called Theodor Graf, who sold most of them to the Archduke Rainer in Austria. And this is the core of the Austrian papyrus sammler, which is one of the greatest in Europe. And so it started by an accident, and it was not an archaeological thing. It was the people taking advantage of the fact that they could sell papyri for a lot of money. And the other story has to do with the Americans and Christianity. The Americans especially, and this is something that has not stopped in time, they were obsessed with finding evidence of the historical existence of Christ and of the early days of Christianity. And so they started sending people. Now we are talking about archaeological missions. They started sending people and financing people who could excavate in Egypt, finding traces of early Christianity. And so in this way, Flinders Petrie, for instance, who is one of the first geniuses that arrives to Egypt, apparently he was financed very heavily by these kind of funny, religious interests. And then very soon, a legendary couple of English archaeologists, Grantham and Hunt, were sent by the Egypt Exploration Society to Oxyrhynchus. And this is where papyrology, here we are in the 90s already of the 19th century. This is where papyrology really starts seriously, because what they find was extraordinary. In Oxyrhynchus, for instance, a copy of the Athenaeum Politeia of Aristoteles was found. And this is the moment when they realize, we can find here also important monuments of the ancient.
I really love these stories, like how collections are built, and sometimes when there's an accident or all these kind of like stories. I think, I don't know, you can maybe confirm that if it's a myth, that some of papyri were found because they were used for the cast of the mummies. And then when they were studying the mummies, they saw, okay, there's a piece of a contract here or something like that.
Or even better, they were used as, for stuffing of the animals mostly, and then as the material for the papier-mâché of the cartonnages. So a lot of what we know as the Berlin papyri nowadays are actually product of dissolving the cartonnage spots in Egypt. Something we wouldn't do nowadays anymore. But thanks to that, we actually have papyri from the places otherwise would not survive, like the Delta and Alexandria. So the whole archive of Protarchus, which was used for the cartonnages. There's this famous anecdote, I think, about Karanis, Soknopaiounesos, where apparently the first excavators were paying the workers at the field extra benefits for each papyrus found, and what they were finding, there were only the crocodile mummies, and apparently one of the workers, angry that it was yet another crocodile but no papyri, broke it in anger, and then it showed that actually it was filled with the papyri, and it's still the case. We still have the papyri from these places in which there were the cemeteries of the sacred animals.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I love, Kuba, that you're using the word excavator, because actually these people were not really archaeologists. They were more like going there for, finding the thing. And dealing with this issue, that some of these papyri were reused for things. And obviously for the non-experts listening to this program, we need to say that when we talk about papyri, don't think about a complete roll or anything. Like what these specialists are doing is like studying or reconstructing a text with just a tiny piece that is sometimes broken in many pieces. So then I would like to ask you about the challenges of studying this papyri. Besides the language, obviously you need to know the very well Greek, or I think this is way more complicated than that when we are addressing this very scrappy material.
Yes, it's a kind of multidisciplinary work in which we have to work together with our colleagues who are specialized in paleography or paleography in the papyri, the papyrologists. Our colleagues doing the conservation process, of reconstruction process of these papyri. We are working for many years now with a group of papyrologists in Spain, working also in the papyrus collections in Spain, in which, for example, the one of Montserrat was also part of this seek of Bible proofs, in which they were looking for, I think they have even a bottle of manna falling from the sky, also taken in a bottle just to Montserrat, and there they have papyri. And when we work with these colleagues, it's really fascinating to see how many steps do you have to take till you reach the text, because we are the final destinatory of what sometimes our friends call the boring papyri. I mean, you don't have literature, religion, or magic, but a hypothec or a loan or things like that. But we have to work together because sometimes we don't have the whole text, but we can help our colleagues to make the reconstruction because since legal speak is always very formulary, and sometimes with only 2 or 3, 4 letters in a special place, you can imagine, you can reconstruct, and you can make the hypothesis of how should that work, and you can read it, and then you can help our colleagues to reconstruct the text. The other way around, they have to help us in order to date the papyri because of the kind of writing they're using, the quality of the ink, for example, the kind of ink, whether it's written in one direction or the other. So it's something that normally you cannot do alone. I mean, they are so complicated because there are many aspects that are outside of legal knowledge, and not only the language you're using, but also the whole context of the document as a writing material, a cultural object.
How did new methodologies have helped you with that? Because I know that I think I was listening to a podcast the other day of Professor Montefusco, I think from Naples, and she was talking about the Herculean papyri and how, thanks to this digital technology they have now, they can penetrate in these carbonized rolls and actually get information. So, do you use any of these technologies? What do you think is the future of this? Even is artificial intelligence going to help us with these materials?
When I was reflecting on this, we have started using digital technology already quite a long time ago, just to make order in the discipline, or to be a bit more fair with the previous generations, to keep the order that they had striving to establish. There are websites, very well established websites that perhaps your listeners will be interested in, where anyone can find the texts themselves, occasionally, increasingly, I would say, also a translation, and all the information that you can imagine about the text, the datation, the place where it was found, the literature on it, increasingly as well. I will just mention 2 sites that are very easy to find. One is called papyri.info, and you just have to put in your browser papyri.info and you will come across it. And the other one is called Trismegistos. So this is because of the Hermes Trismegistos, the 3 times great god, which is the equivalent of the Egyptian Thoth. Yeah, and so these are 2 very important websites for us. For those of our listeners who might be interested in dealing with the papyri more seriously, with the marketing of these 2 sites comes also a note of caution, because the text that you will find in these sites is not a text that should be used scientifically without being double proof. I don't think I do an injustice to papyri.info or to Trismegistos, that one should still check the original editions, because occasionally there are mistakes, and especially because the new readings, this is something inevitable in a discipline that deals with manuscripts. No, each generation tries to better the reading of the previous generations, and these new readings are not in the original editions. They are in an instrument that is very important for us to use. Now I will use a German word, if you allow me. This is the so-called Berichtigungsliste. And the use of the original editions and of the Berichtigungsliste is very important for scientific purposes. But for everyday purposes, so to speak, we also use papyri.info and Trismegistos all the time. So this is the first thing. And then there is the spectacular thing, right? All of you have read in the news in the last, I think, a couple of months, that Elon Musk has donated apparently $3 million so that the papyri from Herculaneum can be deciphered. This because these are very well known, very famous literary papyri. The content, I have to say, so far is, if you allow me to say, a little bit disappointing, because basically what we have from Herculaneum is the production of the philosopher in residence of the very elegant family who owns the Villa dei Papyri, Philodemus. And this is basically Epicurean philosophy. Very interesting, of course, but a little bit narrow in scope. And these are carbonized papyri. And this is the thing that is coming now all the time to the news, because it seems the problem with carbonized papyri, these are rolls, is to flatten the roll, to disenroll the roll. I don't know how to say this in English.
Yeah.
And you cannot
unwrap it
without to unwrap the roll, exactly. You cannot do that without destroying the external layer. Funnily, the carbonization, the fact that the papyrus is carbonized, wouldn't be a problem for reading because the ink is still very visible on the carbonized surface of the papyri. So now the trick is to scan the roll and to use artificial intelligence. This is what Elon Musk apparently was financing, to use artificial intelligence to be able to read without having to unwrap it. The progress has been modest so far. The great news was that a word was read. Okay, maybe if we read one, we will be able to read the whole.
I guess like with any science, we need to take this with a pinch of salt, because basically, you are experts on this. I guess artificial intelligence can help, but, you are saying that even, the critical edition that you find online, you still need to proofread it. But at the beginning of this conversation, José Luis, you mentioned about how papyri talk about society, and in the recent years there has been a lot of voice in ancient studies about the bottom-up approach, the talking about the 99% of the society. So if juridical papyri tell us about this, do they talk about this 99%, or do they talk about the elite, like the people in Herculaneum and this villa, and what can we gather from these sources?
There's a quotation that I have stolen from Cuba, and I don't know from whom you have stolen it, Cuba. This idea that the papyri allows us to look into the kitchen, through the kitchen window of an ancient family of completely ordinary ancient people. This is very true. I mean, most of the papyri we have to do with people that would have no trace in history whatsoever. Occasionally, we dream that we have a papyrus from a celebrity, so to speak. So, for instance, in the Berlin collection, they claim, because of research done by our colleague Peter van Mienen, that they have an autograph of Cleopatra, but this is quite unlikely, in fact. Most of what we have refers to anonymous people and to all sectors of society, including the sectors of society that usually don't have their own voice, for instance, women, all kinds of slaves, freedmen, everything that you can imagine.
So it's sometimes very interesting to follow the history of a family along some generations, because sometimes you have a lot of documents who belong to one archive, professional or personal or mixed together, and then you can see who is marrying who, what are they, if they are buying the field of the neighbor, what problems they have, and you could do a Netflix series just following the story of one family in a little place in Egypt, which is really interesting because you can mix all this kind of daily life practice and follow it, a follow-up of what is the daily life in a little place in Egypt of people who, like José Luis said, they are not going to make it to history.
No, sometimes these people that would have left no trace are also elite people. But this is also very interesting, right? Especially many of the women that we find doing impressive things come from the elite. Not only, we have also very modest people. But Cuba and I have been editing and preparing a commentary on a very famous petition of the 2nd century, presented to the prefect of Egypt, to the governor of Egypt, the most important person in the province, by a woman that would have left no trace whatsoever in history, called Dionysia, who belonged to the elite, to the Greek elite. I always like to tell the example of a woman, also from, in this case, a woman from Alexandria. The date of the one papyrus that we have referred is 56 of our era. This is kind of impressive already, and maybe helps the listeners understand why people dreamt to find documents about the early Christianity and maybe even about the historical Jesus. We have to remember that the Virgin and Jesus and St. Joseph went to Egypt, right, to fly away from Herod. Whenever you find a papyrus that is dated 5 after Jesus, I don't know about Chomin or Cuba, but I feel I am moved by this, yeah. These are people who lived in those times, right? And so in this case, we are a little bit later. It's 56 of our era. And this is a woman from the elite, from the Alexandrian elite, who does something quite extraordinary for a woman or for anyone. She has bought a debt, which is something a bit peculiar to buy, like a financial shark, She buys a debt title and then she sells it in Oxyrhynchus. obtaining, we would assume, profit. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know about this particular transaction, but it's kind of impressive to find out what these people were doing in the financial, if you want to use our categories, in the financial world.
And this lady was from the elite, but since we are also, this papyri allow us to see layers of society that maybe they are not that well seen in other sources. Do they actually also give us an idea of the level of literacy? Because as you know, in the wax tablets from Puteoli, for example, there are many cases that we have the freedman or the slave say, like, I'm writing this, because the person here doing the deal, they don't know how to write. Do you have this in the papyri as well? Are there people saying, this person is writing for me because I don't have the skills for it? Or what can it say about, the ability of read and write in Roman Egypt, for example?
It's only there is a theory in which there is always this clause you were mentioned also in our documents. I mean, another person is signing this or copying this because he is not able to read the letters. On the other way around, it's impressive, for example, for women who want to deal with their own businesses, that in the papyri they say, not only I'm allowed by the laws of the Romans because I have 3 or 4 children and I have this privilege to be independent and to lead my own businesses, but also I can read and write perfectly. So it's not only the privilege, but they add these things. I can read my documents, I understand what you're doing, and I'm writing, and it is the whole argument to show that she is able to deal with everything. Which that should be a big difference when you are looking, because it's expressly said in the document by her. Not only she has the right, but also the ability to read and write, and that should mean something at that time.
This seems quite fascinating that you're actually addressing, what people is worried about, the daily issues. So I guess that you may also have records from disputes that also reveal concerns and agreements and daily problems as well. Yeah, I also would like to say that, this is a topic that is recurrent in all the episodes I record because I'm obsessed with the idea of legal pluralism, the idea of different legal systems coexisting in space and time. So what does papyri tell us about this legal pluralism existing in the ancient world? Since we are talking about, we have an official frame, and then, you have there the concerns of people who they are doing whatever they can to find a way to address their issues.
I mean, maybe we should explain to the listeners what we understand under legal pluralism. The term is quite clear, but we are dealing with situations where there is not just one legal tradition in a place and time, but various legal traditions. This is one of the ways in which we can talk about legal pluralism. People who theorize on legal pluralism, they have further situations that they would also describe as pluralistic. And in this sense, if we are talking about different legal traditions in one place and time, there I would say one cannot generalize. If one thinks about the world of the Greek polis, for instance, they are absolutely not pluralistic. They are the absolute opposite of pluralism. A Greek polis is legislating for itself, this idea of autonomia, proudly, and the citizens of the polis are subjected exclusively to the law of the polis, and this is part of the aspect in which the polis takes pride. And this was also the case of Rome, which was founded as a polis. In Rome, there was the jus civile. It is true from a certain point in time, perhaps the 4th century, as we occasionally speculate, there's an increasing layer of law that is also applicable to non-Romans, but also this layer of law that the Romans call jus gentium is Roman law. So even to the non-Romans, the Roman jurisdiction applies Roman law, only a flexibilized rule. So legal pluralism is by no means a rule in antiquity, but it is almost inevitable in territories that are conquered, because the conquerors that operate in the Mediterranean, they tend to be clever enough not to fight the established local legal traditions, and quite the opposite, to let the local population continue doing things in their own ways, as long as they don't compromise the political objectives of the colonizers. And this is something that happened in the Hellenistic world when Alexander the Great conquered the empire that his successors would divide among themselves, the so-called diadokoi. They respect the pre-existing traditions, and this is something that very famously the Romans also do, right? And so the luck that we have with Egypt, where most papyri have been found, is that there we have a territory where the native Egyptian tradition that was 2,000 years old was respected first by the Greeks and then by the Romans, who of course also respected the tradition of the Greek colonizers. And so we have like layers on a cake. First, the Egyptian legal tradition, then theoretically the Persian, that seems not to leave a lot of traces. Then the Greek legal tradition, very present, dominant legal tradition in Hellenistic times, that the Romans also respect and admire in a certain way. And then the Roman administration. But this is a phenomenon that is quite peculiar of the Roman Empire.
I think that's something that you have the three addressed that in your publications, but also I remember one that you addressed this very specifically, Jose, is about professional specialization. Like in Egypt, there's kind of also people who work drafting these contracts or these documents, and they kind of create, if I can use the word, standards to this melange that we have here, right? Like because there's a Roman norm and that we don't really know many of the standards they use, and then we have this.
I mean, here the listeners will recognize the phenomenon also because we were talking about literacy a moment ago and about situations where people let themselves be helped by others or by professional scribes. But also we, being more or less literate, we don't improvise our legal documents, right? Even when we don't go to a notary, we seek for models, so we let ourselves be given advice as to a model. This is also true in antiquity. The documents that we have are stereotyped, and this proves beyond all doubt that they follow a model, that people are not improvising even when they can read and write. And so the unsung heroes, if you want, of the law of the papyri are these anonymous notaries. Sometimes they are not anonymous, sometimes we know who they were actually, but mostly anonymous notaries who curated, if you want to use the term, these different ancient legal traditions. We have notaries that take care of the old Egyptian legal tradition still in the time of the Ptolemies. These notaries are mostly temple notaries. They are mostly priests that document in demotic. And then we have the system that the Ptolemies establish not only for the Greek population or the Greek-speaking population, but also for the locals. And this is a tradition, this Greek tradition, that the Romans also preserve. And this explains the enormous continuities between the Hellenistic and the Roman times, because the notaries of Roman times are basically the same agora nomoi that the Ptolemies had established practically in every district of Egypt.
I would like to introduce our listeners into some of the different ways of understanding our discipline. This debate between center and periphery provinces, and how, at the beginning, this dichotomy between center and peripheries was seen, especially at the beginning of the 20th century.
I don't know, because Jose Luis and Cuba really did write about these things and that they know much better, but it's interesting to see, for example, when you read the early Roman law discipline, fascinated for papyrology and also about the foundings that could be brought up by these papyri, that they were sometimes also a little disappointed for the kind of things that you could find. I mean, they were just maybe expecting the confirmation live of what Ulpian and Paulus said in the Corpus Juris Civilis, that you could see it live, and the people were absolutely following the instructions when they were in a little village in the deep Egypt, just trying to sell an animal to their neighbor. They are going to follow exactly what Ulpian in Rome used to say, and they discovered that it was absolutely different, or maybe in another direction led to maybe two main positions. Many of them is like they are not using Roman law, or they are not understanding Roman law, or they are far away from the center, or Egypt is something special and that not much what happened really in the Roman Empire in other places in which we don't have the documents. Maybe it was like a reaction of disappointment because they were not expecting to find what they were finding. Now our modern perspective is the other way around. It's a great laboratory to see in reality how all these layers, like Jose Luis said, and like also Cuba studied, how they interact on how was reality when a centered a legal system has to be applied everywhere in the world, especially in places like Egypt, in which there is many legal traditions and really deep and really anchored in the concepts of the people. We don't know, or we don't know so much about other people, but I think this reaction about, and I also have heard it just learning when I was doing my PhD, when I was asking sometimes about what do the papyrus said, and professors saying, well, this is Egypt, this is papyrus, this is another thing, this is not Roman law. Away. And I was looking like, I mean, it was a whole library of wonderful documents of the Roman times. There was there are exotic things that maybe are not clapping with our perfect received idea of a Roman law taken from classical times, cover for Justinian, which is our basic for our modern civil law. Okay, but what happened in reality? And that's the wonderful thing you can find in the papyri. Whether it matches our conjecture, hypothesis or not, it's our problem, not their problem.
Actually, every time in a conference I have heard a big professor saying, this is not Roman law. Normally, it's the most interesting bits, of Roman law you can find. About epigraphy,
Yeah.
well, I work with amphora.
Absolutely right. Or
Yes,
your
I understand.
feeling in archaeology, because you are trained archaeologists and also jurists, and you have this feeling
Yeah.
also. Yes.
Yeah, because maybe the listeners are surprised that we insist so much this is not Roman law. I think this has a historical explanation, right? That many people are not aware of. The first scholars that dealt with papyri of legal content came from Roman law. And so they probably dreamt, as Charming was explaining, but the dream was very soon dispelled, that they would find evidence for the actual application of Roman law. Yeah. They didn't, but the fascination didn't disappear. The funny thing that happened, and with this comes a bit of almost a plaidoyer, is that after the Second World War, this very tight union between the discipline of Roman law that gives us the methodological tools to analyze ancient legal traditions in general, so to speak, and papyrology, an alliance that had been absolutely out of question, absolutely natural before, that the papyri, especially the papyri from Roman Egypt, where even when they don't show Roman law, they are part of Roman legal history because they illustrate what happens in the Roman provinces in the East. This that was evident for Roman law scholars before the war stopped being evident after the war for reasons that are a bit difficult to decipher. In part, I suspect, because many of those scholars before the war had to go into exile from Germany because they were Jews. And this didn't, of course, mean that they would stop publishing, but it meant that they were not able to create a school in Germany, to have disciples in Germany. And so the tradition was interrupted. And also because of reasons that have to do with university politics, because Roman law scholars after the war started fearing, and this is something that we still fear nowadays, that they were becoming irrelevant for the law faculties. And that if they wanted to be relevant for the law faculties, they had to concentrate on the sources that had been at the basis of the modern codifications, which is the traditional sources of Roman law and not at all the papyri. And so you see immediately after the war that Roman law scholars lose interest in the papyri. And this is when I was reflecting for this interview on your question, what are the difficulties that we face? I think the greatest difficulty is that we are very few. Yeah. And so when we publish something about a very specific problem, there is not a critical mass of people that can tell us that we are wrong because we are so few and we are mostly very friendly to each other. Each of us has its little province of study, so to speak, and sometimes we have to wait decades until someone starts getting interested in what we are interested in. And so that is the problem. And with the problem, the invitation to the audience, I don't know who is listening to us, but if they come from the legal studies or from papyrology or from philology or from history, we need people who deal with the legal document.
Yeah, I think you're creating kind of school. I feel I mean, okay, you know better than me, but I'm feeling that I see more works that are actually considering papyri. The fact that is like people who does critical editions as you do, that I guess that is more complicated, right? Like I see more people who work with papyri that have been already, edited. So it's tough subject actually, I understand. But the material is great and there's a lot to do. So yeah, it's a welcome invitation for everyone to join.
If I may just add in something that Jose Luis said before, maybe in a romantic way, when he said, when you find a papyrus that is coming from the change of the era or how you feel, sometimes we are serious researchers with our ties doing our Roman law thing and trying to give the correct impression that we are scientists and everything, but we are also fascinated with the ancient world. And one of the most wonderful things in the papyrology is that you have new documents every day, every month, which not happens in Roman law. And this feeling of discovering, of being able to be surprised, that trying to change your views, they have to change your view because everything is changing, is so exciting that I would use it as a publicity for other scholars who wanted to come to us to enjoy this world in which is absolutely exciting to see what are we going to find. Maybe another boring document, boring in the sense that as we really enjoy having this little piece of daily life of this world, which is wonderful and really touching, but also because there can be surprises, some scientific surprises, cultural surprises, and it's a field which is really developing, well organized, and in which you can jump into a world which is really, really fascinating for new discoveries, which sometimes is not so usual in other fields of ancient history or historical studies also, and especially legal ones.
No, actually, I think what Jose was describing as the disappointment of these legal scholars saying like, oh, we are not matching what Ulpian said. Actually, it's a window of excitement because it shows that, well, first of all, we are, just to recap a little bit, we are talking about the idea that there are legal systems that are coexisting, not even maybe they are contradicting each other, but they are coexisting and working. And this shows that a very dynamic system of, like work and law going on there. So I think that is pretty exciting. And also the fact that, okay, then you can maybe not build a model as to, many old school scholars like to build these kind of big models of like what was going on in law. Instead, maybe you need to look at the case studies, but I think that is what you're doing with your tiny pieces of text. And I think that is pretty exciting. And probably where the discipline is heading now with all these new trends on the study. What do you think the future holds for papyrology as a discipline in the study of ancient societies? Kilosa.
It'll die.
This is really.
It'll die. It'll die. There's no hope.
No,
We're going down.
Oh my God, Kuba.
Yeah, but
growing the funds for. I mean, I've recently heard that the chair that was advertised at Columbia for ancient history would not be given a person because the funds are. So we should not look at any rosy perspective there. It is what we will do, what we want to. I guess what has not yet been said here is that papyrology has to do, or the history of papyrology in general, juristic papyrology as much, with the shift in, you can call it fashion, you can call it things that we research, or the change of the paradigm. But when we were talking about this, the seizures, nowadays we are much prone to look for continuities. When papyrology was founded at the very beginning, a lot in social science and humanities depended on still the old paradigm of sciences, quite uniform, looking for a model, and it doesn't have to have a model at the end of the day as well. You would have the first researchers coming from the 19th century experience of a centralized state, or aiming at centralization, unification of Germany, unification of Italy, France after the epoch of absolutism, so you could not imagine that you could rule a state that would be unruly and unordered. Whereas the Romans did not seem to have that problem. They did not aim at forced standardization. Plurality was the reality of everyday life, and nobody minded that. So I guess this is the little lesson that one can get from papyrology in general, and juristic papyrology in particular. This kind of looking at diversity and looking at multi-leveled or multifaceted reality of everyday life, which we are not so keen to comprehend anymore, I guess.
Something also that in which Kuba is absolutely also right is that I don't know, I hope not, that papyrology and legal papyrology is going to disappear, but he's right in the way that it shares the danger that all classical studies endure. It's located in the law faculty. Even Roman law is always in danger because we are the exotic historical guys not doing the normal things. Imagine if you change to legal papyrology. And under the pressure of disappearing classical studies also before university, how many of our law students are able not to read Latin but to read Greek is absolutely in this thing we have to show how interesting that is and how useful that is. And the only thing we can do is do our job properly. But my experience, for example, in the University of Vienna, well, I'm offering an optional course to legal papyrology to students who are not thinking in becoming historians. They are thinking being lawyers. No, normally they don't absolutely know Greek, and many of them maybe a little bit of Latin. They enjoy these documents like something fascinating. I mean, they love them, and they enjoy a lot dealing with institutions that had nothing to do with Roman law or with our tradition, or they are mixed. Also, this is also a great training for legal historians, just to be able to go out of our schedules, our box, and trying to understand how different peoples are arriving to exotic solutions for things that are different. So there are many things that we can bring, not only, of course, for archaeologists, historians, philologists, but also for the law studies. The problem is that we have to go against this terrible stream of considering everything which is historical, philological, or philosophical as not useful or practical.
Thank you. I think, Jose Luis, you want to add something?
I think this is also the experience of Kuba and myself. I mean, the students find it really fascinating that we have such documents at all. And when we descend into the content, which sometimes is quite surprising, they find it also fascinating. I would also add, in a more optimistic note, something that has surprised our generation is that in the Anglo-American world, where ancient law had not been present as a discipline for a long time, where studies of Roman law had been almost anecdotal, through the papyri, in this generation, there has been a revival of interest in ancient law in practice, if you want to call it like that. And so for the first time, we have, beyond continental Europe, people to talk about these documents. It is true that the methods that we use, the purposes that we have sometimes are different, but this dialogue has been very enriching, I believe. And so this is also a chance. We are always saying that the study of ancient law is in danger in the continent. The fact that beyond the continent, in the Anglo-American world, there is interest in these materials, this is a light of hope also.
But in the Spanish Peninsula, I remember years ago you founded this Spanish Society for the Study of Papyrology. Can I ask, what is the situation of that association? Are there any events that we should look forward to? I imagine that you're all super busy, of course, but just to...
It's a light of well, someone can tell.
Yes, of course. I think we have to talk about the papyrology in Spain, which and it's also about Sofía Torallas and Alberto Nodar, which are the new father and mother, or now grandfather and grandmother, because they are now disciples of the disciples. In Spain, we're really new founding papyrology, and above all, not only training young philologists in this field of papyrology, but also bringing us together many people from different fields. It's a kind of it's science, but also it's friendship, and they were really, and they have the merit, and I think it's important to say that now, even though we are all apart in different countries, Sofia Toraya now is professor in Princeton, and Alberto is in Barcelona. We are in many different countries, and also the young philologists who are working. They were able to put together many scientists who had interest in this kind of documents. I learned papyrology with them. I couldn't do it in the field of Roman law, at least not in the places where I was doing. I was, for example, in Munich for a long time, and Dieter, which was great in many, many, many fields, but also training these kind of things, but especially papyrology, I learned with the philologists, and it was they who were absolutely welcoming us to work with them. And in Spain, after some years of working together, and above all, there was this research group called Ductus, in which who was in charge and financed by the state to study again and do the conservation and the study and the catalog and the publication of the three main papyri collections in Spain, which are Fundación Pastor in Madrid, the collection in the library of the Jesuits in Barcelona, and the great collection in Montserrat. This was also not only the main object of research, but also a wonderful excuse to do courses to introduction in papyrology, to do meetings, to do work together. And now every year there is the Jornadas de Papyrología, which is a fascinating model of serious, not serious congress in which you feel with friends, being confident to show your work in progress and exchanging with your colleagues, which is the basis of the relationship that in the end we decided to put together in an official society in order to give a legal existence to this experience. But the experience comes before this sociedad because of the work of Sofia Torayas, Alberto Nodar, and all the people, young people working with them, which I always feel a student. It was I study with them, I learn with them, and I continue to learn and enjoy with them, which is a great, great project.
Thank you. I think, José Luis, you want to add something as well?
Yeah, my experience was different because I became, I don't know if one can say it, is a juristic papyrologist. This exists in Poland, actually thanks to Cuba. But just to illustrate how, dynamic and how welcoming the Spanish Association is, Cuba, being a Polish professor, was one of the founding members of the Spanish Association of Papyrology. And one thing that maybe we should mention, Chomin and Cuba, is we have organized once a meeting, what we call a winter school. There are so many summer schools. A winter school of papyrology in Barcelona, because winter in Barcelona is nicer. Thanks to Alberto Nodar and thanks to the association. And we plan, we have not yet very specific plans, but we plan to do that regularly. So for our listeners, if this conversation has aroused some interest in them, if they are curious about the discipline, if they are historians or philologists that want to, get closer to the law, or the opposite, if they are lawyers or legal historians who feel curious about the papyri, we do this probably every 2 years, probably in Barcelona, which is the nicest place one can imagine for such a thing.
And you do it in winter in order to make sure that people are not coming to the beach, but to work with the papyri.
Oh, but you can go to the beach in winter in Barcelona.
Yes,
exactly.
In reality, that's the other reason.
Yeah, of course. No, but I would like to also highlight a note on what you're saying as well. A happy note, not rosy, but happy in the sense of like how this sort of studies enhance collaboration, and actually something that we need to bear in mind in legal history. Like when I work with archaeologists, I'm used to them, they cannot work without being a group. Everybody needs a group, like when you're digging a site and you are interpreting. And in legal history, we need to get to the idea that we need to do that too, because you cannot interpret a document by yourself, as you're saying. You need maybe a philologist, maybe just another specialist like you that can give you a different angle. So this is a call for collaboration and not only doing solo publications that are so customary in our field, actually. So, well, I would like to thank you three for being here, for your time, and for this very enlightening conversation about the discipline. I hope that we will get more people interested in the field, and then maybe there will be like some new generations interested in papyri. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.